It's Mark, and it's time to start our show. Get rid of this screen here. So Ron Cole was he's doing some sort of job tonight. He said so. He didn't get the word out as usual, and so I kind of spammed everybody on Facebook, all the stop motion related channels or whatever you want to call them, fan pages or groups, or there's like 100 different names for these things, but all the ones that I subscribe to, I sent notices, so you guys probably found me from there or have come here before. So if you're new to the show, essentially we talk about stop motion animation here. Everything from news, and we have our challenges on our site animateclay.com, and all kinds of stuff. So it's really just kind of a friendly place to meet up and talk about our personal adventures, I guess you could say, in stop motion. Now, so for tonight's show, we're going to talk about making stop motion feet. And just a few weeks ago, we talked about making hands. And so hands are, of course, really important in terms of making your puppets. And I'm hoping I can do this. Let me see. Okay, I can still see the chat. That's good. So with regards to hands, I think the last time we talked about basically making them from wire, wire plus mechanical, so like hard bony parts, and then just purely mechanical. So this kind of is what, this is going to cover pretty much any sort of armature. Like if you're making a skull, feet, or hands, or the entire puppet, you can either do it in, one of these three ways. And yeah, Jason is asking, where's Ron Less? Ron Less is working. He said he has some sort of job to do, which I hope that's all it is, and hopefully nothing weird is going on. All right, hey Hoser Lou Studios, we got Gabriel here, we got Janet, and no de Lafleur Lop, which he calls himself on YouTube. And I did check out your YouTube page. Looks like you have some interest in stop motion, like everybody else, which is really cool. And that's really pretty much. Hopefully, you guys don't know what we're going to talk about tonight, but if you do or know something in addition to what we talk about, feel free to post. Post some comments there about what you know about making feet, because I don't know everything as much as I do know, but. All right, so let's see if I can. Where's my little mouse cursor here? Where are we? There we go. It's kind of hard to see this thing on the screen. I think Adobe Photoshop should have made it where if you have a little mouse cursor, it should be the opposite color of whatever it's over, so you can actually see it. But they don't do that for some reason. All right, so let's see. So the first, I guess, thing we can talk about are wire feet and how to make those. And now, feet are like one of the most important parts of your puppet, and a lot of people don't really give it much thought. And the reason being is, you figure you have your set to build, your puppet to build, your lighting, and your animation and everything, and it can get really daunting in terms of what you need to know to actually start animating. And some people, I think Jason, you were saying something about you don't like to use tie downs, or no, I guess it was Ken. I think Ken told me last time. Doesn't really care to use tie downs, and a lot of people don't. Tie downs, though, are extremely important, and so we should probably discuss a little bit about tie downs first, because there are different ways to adhere a foot to your set floor, and one is through magnets. And the way you do that is, let's see here. Maybe I can make another layer. Oh, I guess I made one. Haha. Okay. So tie downs. Let's see. I'm going to make this all red. Okay, maybe a little bit darker. so I don't go blind. All right, now let me make some new text color. All right, so we have tie downs. And for some reason, it's not showing up on my screen here. I'm gonna make a new layer here above. Okay, so we got tie downs. All right. So, how can we tie feet down? So the first is to use pins. And pins are just essentially, you know, of course, straight pins for sewing and so forth are a dime a dozen. You can get them in clothing stores and so forth. And also wire. So we got wire. And I'm going to explain this in a minute. And then we have magnets. Oops. And then finally we have standard tie downs. All right. So when you make feet, you need to essentially figure out which one of these you want to use. And the other option, of course, would be to use just, you know, if you wanted to use something like flat feet and either like sticky wax under there. But your puppet has to be really lightweight. So we're going to actually omit that as an option here because most puppets weigh a bit more. And I guess also we could say like we could use a rig as well. We don't need tie downs or any of this stuff if we use a rig to hold our puppet up. But for you know, doing walk animations and so forth, you want to use one of these here pretty much every time because otherwise you're just kind of giving yourself more work through digitally erasing things and all that kind of stuff, like using Photoshop like I'm doing now. Oh, okay. So so Jason is saying the feet seem strong enough until you try to make your puppet bend over and his head hits the floor. Yeah, that's a big problem. And he says, I thought that I would prefer rig removal, but after many hours on the computer, I've developed a new approach for tie downs. That's cool. And Brian is saying also you can use tape. And that's true. You know, any sort of adhesive material, clay, sticky wax, tape, you know, double-sided sticky tape would work. Anything that's, you know, temporary. You also have to figure out what your set is made of as well. Like if you're using styrofoam, that's where pins come in. So styrofoam set floors can be used and shaped and then painted, and you can stick stuff in there, right? So pins work really great because you can come down from above your foot and put a pin in or two in there, and your puppet can usually stand if the pins are long enough and the puppet's not too heavy. And also with wire also works with this sort of situation where you're using a styrofoam set floor. And the way that this works, and let me make another layer here. And I'll quickly sketch out how this actually, how this trick works. And this is something that I did with Webster Colcord, and Webster Colcord taught me this a while back. I guess in the mid-90s, where we made a really small puppet, and the puppet was made of wire, had a wire armature, and it was all wire, and I believe inside there was just Pro-Epoxy to hold the pieces together. And the feet were not really feet, they were just the armature kind of extended like this. So we had like these really super long legs and then a stubby body. Stubby arms, well, not really stubby arms, but proportionally small arms, and a small loop or something here of wire for the head. And so what I did was I would sculpt. So the purple here will be what I've actually sculpted. So and I used what did I use to sculpt this with? I used Super Sculpey Flex. And Super Sculpey Flex is something that I know they still make it, but they call it something else, I think. And what it is it's a polymer clay that when you bake it, it can sort of stay flexible like a very dense kind of rubbery material. So this only works for small puppets with Super Sculpey Flex because the heavier you make your, or the thicker you make your parts, the harder it is to bend an enemy. So the puppet, I think, was only about maybe 2.5 inches tall. And as you can see, this green would be the wire, and it went down through the puppet's feet. And this here would be what you press through your styrofoam set floor. And one of the tricks that we did was, so here's our styrofoam. Here's the set floor. And when the puppet would walk, we would actually take this wire and one foot would be stuck into the styrofoam to hold up the puppet. And as this leg lifted up, we would pull out the wire and bend that wire away from the camera and up behind the puppet from the camera's point of view. So no matter which way the puppet turned during the animation, that wire that comes out of one foot would always be behind the puppet and be hidden. So that works really well if you don't have lighting that is too sharp, where you can see the wire's shadow sort of in the back of your set. So the set was lit in a way that was kind of twilight, and the puppet was walking at like this outdoor movie theater. So there wasn't a lot of sharp light for that wire to contrast a shadow onto the floor. Also, you had to deal with the holes in the set floor as well, and I don't think I had any problem with that because I think he only took like 2 steps. And if there was a hole, one of the things that people are always afraid of is, well, now I've got this puppet and I've got wires that I'm poking through the set, which I spent all this time making. And so covering those things up is very simple. Let me make another little layer here. This might look unusual, this color, but so when your feet go through or when your tie downs or wire or whatever it is goes through the floor, you can cover the holes with either tape, clay, let's see here, tape or clay, or digital. So with the tape, what you want to do is you want to look at your set and you want to evaluate, what color paints you use to paint your set floor. Then when you use your tape, what you're wanting to do is you want to take a small piece, the smallest possible piece that you can, to cover the hole. And then you want to take that paint that you use to paint the set floor with, and you want to paint over that little piece of tape with the same color paint. That will essentially hide your hole, and you want to make sure that before you snap off a frame of film, also that the paint has dried, because you don't want to have like a shiny blob that shows up on the first frame where you cover it, and then it dries, and then by the third frame, you can see it sort of evaporating, the water evaporating. That would distract from your shot. So you want to make sure when you use tape and you use paint on that the paint dries quickly. So you don't want to really use something like enamel paints or oil paints or something like that. You want to use acrylics or like watercolors or something that will dry within, hopefully less than 5 minutes, because otherwise your shot could be, really long, right? It can actually slow down your animation if you're making a fast walk or a run cycle or something like that. So tape and paint is really a great way to do it, and you can even use this technique on things like textured wooden floors and stuff that you've created, and you can use like a dry brush or use different colors to match the dark parts and the light parts, and the camera won't really pick it up if it's, unless it's really focused right on the foot. And if you're focusing on a foot in a shot, you want to make sure you use like a rig or something like that that's off camera, where the foot isn't actually making holes or divots in your set floor or anything like that. Also, if you want to try and use clay for your set floor, like I know that Will Vinton during the claymation years would make sets that used actual clay on the floor, which is most people think that's kind of crazy because you get dirt and dust on there. It's hard to clean and everything. But if you're really a purist and you want to go the clay animation route, if your set floor is made from clay, covering say a layer of wood, or even, like I said, styrofoam or anything like that, any holes that you put in there, like using the wire pieces coming through the armature, can be covered up with the same color clay, or just smoothed over. So it kind of, in a way, it makes it easier to do like walks and stuff like that in certain situations. So back to clay, if you have a set floor and this set floor is made out of something like wood or styrofoam, or covered with maybe plaster or any kind of textured material, and is painted, you can actually take clay and you can mix up colors and make those colors the same color as your set floor. And as you're drilling holes for tie downs, you can fill those holes with the same colored clay, and texture it with your tools, and get everything to look exactly the same as before you drilled your holes in there. And finally, of course, is digital. So if you drill your holes, you stick your pins in there or whatever, you disturb the set in any way with your puppet's feet, then you can digitally clean that up by taking photos of your set without the puppet in there before you drill all your holes, and get a clean image of that set from the same exact perspective. And then you can drill all your holes in there, and later on you can use that untouched set photo to clean up your whatever you've got going on in your shots. So that's a little bit more complicated, using Photoshop and layers and so forth, where you can insert layers like this, where I'm just clicking a button and making it visible and invisible. You do the same sort of technique with layers, where your rear layer is the clean image, and then your foreground layer in Photoshop or other digital programs is erased, and you can like literally erase the holes. It's kind of a cool technique. The only problem with that is, of course, with shadows and stuff, and of course that creates its own problems. So that's why a lot of people like to go with just the practical way of using tape and paint and clay, because digitally it can get really complicated, and it's actually more work in some ways. All right, so let's see here. So Brian is saying there are tricks to hiding rigs too, but tie downs help add weight. And he's asking yellow stuff. Yeah, this is my yellow stuff right here, my text. And so Gabriel is saying, I was thinking about using a foam mix mat over the floor and making the incisions for the holes using a scalpel, just a line, so when the foot moves away you won't see a hole. It's a good idea, especially if you could paint it. That would be awesome, because then you could have self-sealing holes. It's a good idea. Oh, it's Ron. Ron made it. Welcome to the show, Ron. And Brian is saying that Sculpey Superflex Bake and Bend is what they call it now. All right, well, thanks, Brian. So that's the new name for it. No longer called Super Sculpey Flex by itself. It's Bake and Bend. And all right. So what else can I say? So this is basically stuff that you want to think about beforehand. You want to think about how you're how your set will interact with your puppet, and how much damage you're essentially going to do in the process. All right. So, all right, I'm going to take all this out of here, hopefully. And I don't think there's anything else I had to add in terms of all that stuff. So, delete some of these layers behind the scenes. All right, so and of course I didn't really talk much about magnets. The only way that you can use magnets with your puppets as feet is to make sure that the feet themselves are made of steel that's magnetic, and you want your set floor to be either like sheet metal or something like corrugated, or hopefully not corrugated, I guess, because that's wavy, but any sort of sheet steel that you can find that's magnetic, and you stick a large magnet underneath the entire set, and the entire floor becomes magnetized. And on top of that, you don't want to add anything more than just like a very thin layer of texture. You don't want to make the distance between the foot and the magnet very far, because then it won't hold your puppet up. That's really the only thing you have to think about with magnets, and that's a great way to go as long as your set floor is perfectly flat, pretty much. And that's pretty much it. You cut a piece of steel, and we can talk about that when we get to the mechanical part. But if you're going to use all wire, let's see if I can delete this, and then what is this? This is okay. Here we go. I think this will work. Yes. Okay. So all wire feet are, this is one of the things where I was saying you can make an armature where you have wire coming through the ankles, straight through, in order to stick through a set floor that's made from something like styrofoam or any kind of softer material. Even clay would work, like thick clay. But that's not really a foot per se. That's just one of the ways you can do things. You can actually you can create a foot and then add a piece through the ankle and get the same exact effect if you wanted to. But let's say we're not going to have a soft set floor in all three cases here. We're going to have a hard wood floor made from MDF, which is a medium density fiberboard, or even plywood or something, whatever we have in our garage that's laying around. That's going to be our set floor. It's non-magnetic, and we're going to make our foot from wire. And so one of the ways to do it is to just make a loop. And in order to do that, we could have our foot, and this will be our, let's say, lower leg, and then we have a loop of wire, and let's say it looks like this. Now, to adhere something like this to a set floor would require a screw, and that would come through the top and push down on your foot. And you want to consider a foot like this, where we have a screw that comes through, something like this. And we got some threads. And maybe this is like a Phillips, or let's just say it's a flathead type screw. And this is the most simple way to make a foot, right? But it's not really the nicest way, but it works. And so if you have a wooden floor, you can just drill a hole and screw your foot down like that. So let's see here. And Hoser Lou is saying, with regards to magnetic feet, he says, couldn't the magnets make the puppet move inadvertently? And yeah, it can. Magnets are only really good for making a puppet slide, like ice skating, that kind of thing. And if your puppet is mostly stationary, where you don't see the feet, but you want the puppet to be held down and have a little bit of freedom in their movement of their feet, where you're not going to see if that foot jerks around or anything like that. So an upper body shot of a puppet where you have a full puppet made, sometimes it's easier than using tie downs because you can quickly put the puppet in the shot and slide him back and forth. There's no drilling holes and so forth, and so it's a lot quicker to do it that way. But yeah, there's problems with magnets where the foot isn't going to really be really super solid. So like if your character is on one toe or something and walking, if you bump your character just a little bit, it can throw it completely off. Because of think about how much leverage there is with the puppet on one toe, and you bump their head, it's enough to really disturb your puppet to where you kind of can't get it back in place perfectly. The same as with tie downs. A tie down is locked down solid, and even though bumping a character is not good in any case, magnets make it a little bit harder for sure. So we got our wire foot, and this is, like I said, really simple. The other way you could do it is you can make like a figure 8 for the foot, and this would give your character, and here's your ankle. So usually you want to use a couple of strands of wire to make your, like a twist of wire for your legs. Sometimes 3 strands is actually even better. And you can make a figure 8, and what this does is it gives you the ability to use a toe, and you can bend that foot a little bit in a more natural way. So again, you would drill your drill a hole in your set and plan your steps before you actually drill holes, and use the tip of your toe if you want to. Now that's good for certain things, not good for other things, but depends on what you're doing animation wise. Like for example, if your character is landing, their front foot is landing on the floor as they're walking, their toe sometimes is pointed upwards, so you would use the rear hole to tie that puppet's foot down, and then probably shift to the front toe. So that would require drilling 2 holes, and some people don't want to do that. It just depends on like what you're actually after, and what your character is doing. So really, this is kind of you can make as many loops as you want here. You can have 3 for some reason if you wanted that. If your character is like an alien or something, you could extend like toes out of here with wire, and to make your wires stick together, like if it's several pieces and you're wanting to attach these toes on here, you could use anything from a 2-part epoxy to propoxy, that kind of thing. But that gets more into the mechanical wire plus mechanical feat, which we're going to talk about now, because we're already about halfway through the show, so I'm going to speed things up just a tad bit here. So wire and mechanical adds more complexity to a foot, and I'm going to explain a very simple way that people can make a foot from a small piece of wood, and that actually uses tie downs and gives you the ability to use a screw as well. And I have 3D printed feet that we sell using this same concept. And how it works is you get a piece of wood that's kind of rectangular, and you want it to be not too thick. You want it to be maybe 3/8 or 1/4 of an inch or something like that, and that's what you want to start with. Now then what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a hole for your ankle wire to go into. So your puppet, we're presuming, is made from wire, aluminum wire, or you could use copper or steel if you wanted to, but that's not really as nice as aluminum because it's a lot softer. So you got your hole here, which would be whatever the dimension is that you measure once you make the wire apart. So, this could be technically, really, really large, 1/2 inch if you had some gigantic puppet of some sort. But we're going to say that this is around maybe 3/8 or so for most puppets, where you got 3 strands of 3/16 or so. You want to, make it where the wire is snug, and you want to make it so that when you use a 2-part epoxy, that there's no wiggling of that wire before you add the epoxy. It's really important to do that. Like if there's too much wiggle when you insert your wire ankle in there, and then you add epoxy, it's not going to be as strong. Okay, so you want to make this hole as small as you can, but large enough that your wire fits in there. Then you want to cut a notch in the toe, and the way we do that is we drill a hole first. Drill your hole, and then take a saw and then cut so that there's this notch here. Let me erase what I don't want. Alright, so it's gonna look something like this. Now, at Will Vinton Productions, when they were doing the California Raisins and all that kind of stuff back in the 80s and 90s, they used a small piece of brass and did this sort of configuration. Instead of drilling a hole and using a very thick piece of brass, they used a very thin piece of brass. And from there, they would put a piece of square tubing to insert their lead wire. They use lead. But so we're going to use wood here. Now, once you've gotten it this far, you could do the same thing as before, where we were talking about using screws for just the wire feet. So you can insert a screw here, and the head of the screw is like this, and now we've screwed that foot to the set floor. All right, so that's one way to do it. And then the next option is to use tie downs. So let's see. So Travis says I got a lot of luck attaching wires like that with super glue and baking soda. That would work too. That's a good idea. Very actually, I think last time I had thought that you needed to use that zip kicker stuff for that to work, but actually, using baking soda and super glue by themselves is enough to do that, which so I'm always learning stuff from you guys. All right, now so this is a simple foot, but let's say we want to take this a bit further and make this a little bit more complicated, but also make it into a better foot than it is. All right, because right now it's it'll work, but going above the foot means that we had to design this foot in such a way that we can remove whatever we use to cover the foot, be it clay or cloth or silicone or foam latex. We had to actually peel that back and come above with the screw and come down through the foot, hold it down, and then reapply whatever coverings we have on the feet. So that doesn't really make this foot such a great foot in that sense. And it'll work, but it's just more complicated and more work. But if we were to come from underneath the set and attach the foot using tie downs from underneath, whatever we cover this foot with will not be disturbed, and it will improve, hopefully improve our animation experience. So using the same concept, I'm going to redraw this foot a little bit larger. So something like this. So here's our initial design. Oops. It's kind of hard to do this with the mouse, but so it looks kind of like this, roughly. Looks like a third grader did this, but so here's our ankle hole here. So we're going to drill another hole in the center. Now, what this does is, now we don't really necessarily need this notch, right? We can actually get rid of that if we wanted to, just for this next one. But if we're gonna make this like into a, you know, a double optioned foot, I guess you could call it, we're gonna have a hole in the center, and this is for the ankle wire. So the ankle wire comes out here. Let's say it's 3 strands of wire or something like that. And that would be the same with this one as well. You know, this is the ankle wire comes up, and we're going to use a 2-part epoxy, and that'll be secured. And now with the center hole, what we're going to do is we're going to take a nut like this, and we're going to put that over this hole. And this nut obviously has threads in there, right? And when we attach it here, we're going to either use crazy glue, or we're going to use more epoxy, or whatever we have available. Attach it to the top of the foot, and we're going to insert our tie down from below. All right. So a tie down is just a threaded rod, somewhere around 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, maybe 3 inches. Just depends on what you have. Just long enough to go through your set floor and up into this nut here on top of the foot. And on that we have, you know, one of these, what do they call them? Like butterfly nuts. I always call them butterflies. I forget the actual term. What is it called? But you can use thumb nuts, which are, you know, pretty typical in stop motion. They kind of look like this. Kind of have this shape to them. And they've got like a little knurling, they call it, like a texture. And through the center is what you would put your threaded rod through. And this would go up through the set floor and into your upper nut on the foot. Wing nuts, that's it. Thanks, Thomas. So you got your wing nuts as an option. Got your thumb nuts. You could even use, you know, a regular old nut that you've modified. And I know a long time ago, one of the first things I did when I didn't have wing nuts was I drilled a hole through one of the nuts and stuck a little rod in there that I could, you know, use my finger and twist around. So whatever you've got available, as long as it can push up on the bottom of your set as it ties your foot down. So that's pretty much, you know, all there is to this, and it works really great. And it's like the first point of contact with your set floor, and so it's really crucial to understand how these work. And of course, like I say, you know, my drawing skills with the mouse are horrible, as you can see, but you can kind of get an idea of how this would work. Now, if you wanted to, you notice on our wire here, you could also take one of these nuts, and you can, let's see here, it's a different color. Where are we at here? Maybe red. You can actually lay a nut over a twisted hole like this. You can lay it over the hole, and where's my, there we are. And you do the same thing with just wire, you know. So we can have our little nut like this, and we would epoxy that over the wire itself. It's not as secure, it's not going to be as strong, especially if you have a toe on the front where this is bending, and it's going to cause a lot of stress to this nut here, and it might pop off. But if you're just going to use either one sort of loop instead of two, or perhaps you know, you're not going to bend this ankle too much, it'll still work. You know, I've made a lot of people make armatures this way, and it's pretty good. You could also use something like Propoxy, which is a 2-part epoxy as well, and you can build up the area around this nut with that and make it kind of thick to where the bending of the wire doesn't really affect the nut too much in how it's held down. It's really the bending of the wire that will loosen that nut off the top with whatever you're using to hold it down with. So that's two options there for wire, and you can see with the wooden feet as well. And again, you don't have to use wood if you don't want to. If you have a thin sheet of plastic that's fairly thick, or plywood, you can use basswood. I wouldn't recommend you use balsa wood; it's very soft. But any material that is like this, like even acrylic, like a plexiglass type material that's thick, you could use as well for just the same kind of technique. So Jason is saying, or you could do like they do in Shaun the Sheep and not use feet unless you absolutely have to. Yeah, we observed that during one of our shows. We tried to see if we could see the feet walking on the set, and yeah, they avoided. Aardman avoided showing the feet of those sheep. Like I think for almost the whole entire film, the whole entire short film that they had, and it's common. They just don't want to have to deal with that. It just takes too much time and effort, and it slows the animation process down. So it's almost funny, isn't it? Now Gabriel says, I don't know why, but I feel the crazy need to make a walking cycle. My supplies are taking too long. Ah, okay. Did you order your supplies from us by any chance? Because I know we've got all orders have been shipped out. So I had one customer cancel their order from Canada, and they said, if you haven't shipped my order out yet, can I cancel that and get a refund? Because something happened, and it's like, well, I've already shipped them all out, so they gotta ship it back to me. But anyways, so mechanical now. So we've talked about wire. We talked about a couple of options there. Wire and mechanical. And I should probably add one final thing to this before I move on. And with the wire and mechanical, if you wanted to, you could actually drill holes into your wood here in the toes and add a loop of wire like this. Well, actually, you know what? Maybe a little bit bigger. Something like this. And this gives you the ability to either wiggle the front part of the foot. You could add toes, add wire here. If you had a couple of let's say this was not a notch here, you could add like 3 toes or 4 toes and drill right in there and epoxy that wire in, and you've got a 3-toed alien foot or something. So you can bend those around and so forth. And it's pretty simple to fix. Like if the wire were to break, you could actually cut or snip that off and then re-drill a hole close by to that hole and insert more wire. You could add 100 toes if you wanted to in there. That would be kind of weird. All right. So let's see. Go back here. All right. So mechanical. Now that is something that, of course, this is more for experienced people, and someone that might have a machine shop, might have a CNC machine, or perhaps, is really handy with, soldering things with a propane torch, or maybe casting. You could cast something like this as well in a small furnace, which I've tried to do a long time ago when I was in a jewelry store. We had the ability to cast stuff, and one of the things that they had was a kiln, a furnace, and the ability to use some waxes and utilize this technique called the lost wax technique, which is what they use to make rings and pendants and things like that. So you could actually make mechanical feet using those kind of processes if you wanted to, if you had the ability to, which not many people do. But mechanical feet are something that someone like Tom Brierton is really famous for doing this kind of thing. Maybe Jim Danforth is another person. Um, Tom Saint Amand, who worked, with Phil Tippett. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's just so many people, who do this kind of thing. Jeff Taylor is another person. And one of the ways that you can make feet is kind of similar to what you see here in the wire and mechanical. And it involves, like a sort of tongue and groove sort of thing. Sure, I'm not really accurate in my descriptions because I'm not a machinist myself. But one type of foot kind of looks like this, where we have a groove. And it is in a piece of usually machinable aluminum so that there's some flex to it. And so it looks kind of like this. Same exact sort of shape as the feet I showed you over to the left. And what they usually do is they put like a groove in the aluminum somewhere around here. They actually cut it with a saw. And then we have files and machining and so forth. And we usually round some of these parts off. Make them a little bit smooth and perfect, which is what machinists are good at. So there's no sharp edges when we work with it. And then the part that goes inside is like the male piece that goes to the female piece, like this. And then usually the toe is, rounded. Looks kind of fancy and nice. Something like this. And through here, what the machinist will do is they'll drill some holes, usually here and there. And through the centerpiece of this, the toe, and then this side here will be a threaded hole. So let's see here. Oop, where are we at now? Okay, 36, 4. So we have our threaded hole here in the back. And this part here, this hole will be a little bit large hole, and this one as well. So it's kind of best description I can kind of give. It's a larger hole than this one. Okay, and then let's see here. Holes. Okay. So what this does is the threaded hole corresponds to a machine screw. Okay, so the machine screw will have the same threading as the threaded hole, and it will be just long enough to go through all three parts when this part here is pushed up into the rear of the foot. Also, I should mention that of course they have a ankle hole here as well, just like in the wooden one, for their ankle wire, or usually if you're gonna make it like this, you're gonna use a rod of some sort with like a ball on there, right? And there's also usually like a hole in the side or in the back for a set screw, small machine screw with tiny, hexagonal rear hole there, so that you can insert your hex key, Allen wrench, whatever you want to call it, and it'll secure all that together. But anyway, that's another story, I guess. But for the toe, your rod will go through. Let me see if I can get a different color. And when this here goes right through there, this is like the worst diagram ever, but when you put that hex head cap screw, or whatever you want to call it, through here, hopefully I'm explaining this correctly. When it tightens down, the head of your screw will touch the side of the foot, and prevent it from going through all the way, correct? So what will happen when you tighten it down, when the threads hit this rear side of the toe, it will pull the toes together. And when this part is in the center of these two like toe pieces, it'll cause the center part to have friction applied to it, and it will hold its position. And the tighter you make it, the tighter these two parts squeeze together onto this piece, and the harder that toe will be to bend. So the groove here in the center allows for the metal to literally flex and apply pressure to this centerpiece. So the way it's tied down is there's usually a hole right here, and it's threaded with something like a 4-40 tap and die set, and the tie down itself is usually a 4-40 as well, and it will go up inside of this little hole. And again, just like we showed before, you can use something like a wing nuts, or I like to call them butterfly nuts, and or you can use your thumb nuts as well. And you put this in between the set floor and the toe. Right. So here's your set floor. And this goes right up through into that hole. And when you tighten this down, you'll secure that foot to the floor, and that's pretty much it. So hopefully that's not too complicated. I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can, and I'm sure my terminology is not perfect. Like I say, I'm not a machinist. I don't think I'll ever be a machinist. I'm better at 3D printing stuff. But so Jason says, I carved a pendant in that jewelry blue wax. It was amazing, the detail that came out in the silver. Oh, awesome. So you actually had the chance to do that. That's great. Yeah, I mean, the detail is pretty good, if you use the lost wax method. Those sort of plasters that they create for that can really pick up details, similarly to something like UltraCal 30, which, but it's kind of dangerous, I'm kind of glad I don't do that anymore, because those plasters have these like fibers in there, and it's kind of unsafe to breathe. So Brian Lee says, I have a ball and socket armature with threaded rods screwed into balls. Yep. That's pretty much how, you can do it that way, and use something like Loctite in there, silver solder. I mean, the best way to adhere those parts is with something like, silver solder, if you can do it. But that only really works well with steel. Aluminum is really hard to heat up enough for that kind of thing. So Brian says, does anyone have recommendations for a removable Loctite to apply between the threaded end balls? The stuff I'm using now isn't holding the balls and screws together. Well, I mean, there's different grades. I mean, there's like the permanent type, there's temporary, just depends. And there's a lot of different manufacturers of it too. So I don't really know. I don't know. I don't know what to really recommend in terms of like numbers and stuff. And Ron says it needs to be removable. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I try. And so Thomas is saying, Brian, are you using blue or red thread lock? It takes 24 hours to cure, but the red stuff needs a blowtorch to remove. Yeah, that's pretty hard to remove that stuff. If it's permanent, the permanent type. Yeah. I mean, it's always good, like if you're just making an armature for experimentation, you could use just like crazy glue, and it'll hold it, fairly well, and you can just like crack it out of there if you had to. But I don't know. I mean, Jeff Taylor recommended using crazy glue, and I tried that. It doesn't work that well. But it'll you know, for a few shots, it'll hang in there. You know, and I think Crazy Glue is probably the weakest option in terms of, you know, if you're really wanting to take it apart and put it back together later on, or do that a lot, you can use that. Huh. So Ron is saying that he has a solution. He says that he files grooves across the threads on both the ball and the rods, and then apply epoxy when I screw them in. Yeah, that would work. And Thomas says you can still remove it. It just takes heat, and it's not going to come apart otherwise. Yeah, one of the problems with that, though, with Loctite, or really anything that you put in there, is going to have somewhat of a permanent residue inside your threaded holes. And when you try to re-thread stuff through those holes, it's going to be really hard. You know, it's going to be hard to get it in there. Like, it might go halfway and get stuck. And that can be really frustrating, you know. So you almost have to use like a fresh rod, or you need to use something like a brass bristle brush to clean everything off as good as possible once you finally, you know, get the threads unlocked. You know, it can make it a pain in the butt. But if you have also like a, you know, tap and die set, you can kind of go back in there and clean that out that way as well. All right. Well, anyways, wow, it's almost been, I've got about 3 more minutes left. I'm going to close all this. All right. That is permanently gone. So does anybody have any final things they want to say or questions before we go? Let's see. But that's a really good question. You know, Loctite is, it's a really common thing, but it can be confusing as to what type to use. And like I say, I'm not really an expert with Loctite. I don't really build armatures too often. But they're, like I say, if you use permanent, it's going to be really, really hard to take apart. That's why I always kind of stick with simple stuff like Crazy Glue. So Brian is asking, so basically you create a gap that the epoxy can go in. And Ron says, I've never had a ball come off a threaded rod after I do the grooves and the epoxy. The resin fills the grooves and makes it impossible for the screw to ever turn again. That's awesome. You know, epoxy is pretty amazing stuff. We went to Branson, Missouri over the weekend, and they had this church built entirely out of cedar on the inside, and it's built to look like an old sort of 1800s simple church. And when I walked in there, I looked around and I noticed on the floor, what they had done with the floor is they used nails in there. But to prevent the nails from popping out during warm weather and cold weather hitting and shrinkage and expansion of the wood, was to countersink the nail holes with some sort of a tool. And when they did that, they would nail the nail down through the wood, and they would cover the top of that hole with epoxy. So the nail was like countersunk. They used some sort of a tool to actually put the nail below the surface, and then take epoxy and then cover each hole. I would say it was about maybe 3/8 thick worth of epoxy in there. So you know, epoxy is a great thing for so many projects, and you can use it pretty much for armatures made from metal and wood. If you're going to use metal and you're going to use epoxy, the kind of stuff that I use, what is that stuff called again? Oh man, let me look it up real quick here. There is one particular type of epoxy. see if I can find it real quick. See, here's there's so many types you can see here. See if I can get this on here. So as you can see, there's a lot of different types of epoxies out there. And the type that I'm thinking of, I'm not seeing it offhand here. Oh, here it is. JB Weld. Okay. So if you're going to use any kind of epoxy for metal, this is actually one that is invented specifically for surfaces where they're hard, like glass, metal, acrylic, like plexiglass. And one of these, this one here, I believe has like a rubbery substance in there. And if you do not have, if you use something like crazy glue and you try to glue a pair of flat surfaces together, let's say two armature parts that are flat aluminum, and you want them to adhere to each other fairly strongly, right? If you use something like crazy glue, a lot of times what will happen is it becomes very brittle when it's dry. So this particular type of epoxy allows there to be some flex, and that gives it a lot more strength, especially if you were to drop your armature or something like that on the floor. It absorbs some shock. So this is something that I think you guys might consider. If you're gonna not use Loctite and you're gonna use something like crazy glue, try JB Weld. It's pretty good stuff. And this is actually something that I think Jamie Haggerty in Wolverton Productions used a real lot for that specific purpose of making something strong as opposed to brittle. So anyway, just something to think about. I'm not really sure what kind of epoxy Ron is using, but that might be something worth considering or experimenting with to see if it does work well. All right, so anyways, that does conclude our show, and hopefully you guys will come by next week. Thanks, Janet. You like that wallpaper? Yeah, it's that is from. I sent the link to Ron. There is a wallpaper link to all these different Star Wars wallpapers, like 68 different kinds, and this one here works pretty good for me. So, all right. Well, anyways, I guess that does conclude our show. If you guys have any topics you want me to talk about next week, just find me on Facebook or send me a message on our fan page on Facebook, and I'll see you guys later. All right. Adios.